My name is Tom Candon. I'm the Associate Director at the Institute for Security, Technology, and Society. This evening, in collaboration with the Institute for Information Infrastructure Protection, we bring you Professor David Wall from Durham University. A little background first. ISTS is dedicated to pursuing research and education to advance information security and privacy throughout society, while the I3P is managed by Dartmouth College and is a consortium of leading universities, national laboratories, and nonprofit institutions dedicated to strengthening the cyber infrastructure of the United States. Professor Wall will deliver this evening a lecture entitled Policing Cybercrimes, Responding to the Transnational Challenges of Cybercrime. He comes to us from Durham University in the UK, where he is a professor of criminology, teaching and conducting research in the areas of cybercrime, policing, and intellectual property crime. Durham University and Dartmouth College are members of what is known as the Rhetoric network, formed, I think, back in the springtime of this year. The purpose of the organization is to increase opportunities for member institutions to share ideas, expertise, and best practices. It brings together a range of 7 universities from across the world together in this mission. Prior to Durham University, Professor Wall was at the University of Leeds, where he served at separate times as head of the School of Law and director of the Center for Criminal Justice. He has published a wide range of articles and books on tonight's subject, including Cybercrime, the Transformation of Crime in the Information Age, and Crime and Deviance in Cyberspace. And if there are any musicians in the crowd, you'll be interested to know that prior to joining academe, Professor Wall played bass for 2 rock bands that toured the United States, Canada, and Europe. So with that lead-in, thank you, Professor Wall.
Thanks, Tom. Yeah. Oh, well, it's a great pleasure to be here. Quite an interesting journey here, not least the Cape Air flight from Boston. Buddy Holly's last flight was sort of sprung to mind. At least I didn't have to sit next to the pilot like one of my co-passengers. No, but it's great. It's really good to be here. It's a lovely campus, and I've enjoyed talking to people today, and I hope I can say something coherent as well after a full, long day of chat. This, of course, is me delivering my cybercrime lectures at Durham. I'm not quite sure what it is. I think it's from some steampunk exhibition. And the beauty is I normally breach copyright law left, right, and center with my slides. But I've actually got a fair use defense now I'm in the US, which is great. Education, parody, yeah. Okay, so today I'm going to talk about policing cybercrimes and some of the challenges that cybercrimes create for police, but challenges that are also locked within a politics of policing and a politics of regulation. And the problem in the UK is exactly the same as it is in the US, as it is in many places. And one of the big problems is we have the cybercrime rubric within which we have the rhetoric of cybercrime, but we also have its reality. And they're not one and the same thing. And I'm going to go through this and try and give some examples. But then we also have, we need to explain this, and that's what I'm then going to do. We have various tensions in the production of knowledge which shape our view of cybercrime, but there are also various cultural distortions in the cultural construction of cybercrime which shape our view. Then, once we've worked out what they are, I want to put to you the way I would map out cyberspace, which is, I hope, just to make sense of it. Because there's a lot of things going on. It means a lot of things to a lot of people. There are a lot of different voices with an interest in cybercrimes. And there's also some very, very questions about how real that threat is. We had a lot of people telling us the sky was going to fall in, and the sky hasn't fallen in. But then there are some changes that have taken place in recent months, recent years, which may suggest that some of the original cybercrime prophecies may be coming true. I then want to just briefly outline the challenges of cybercrimes and policies being implemented to deal with them. And this is just what we're doing in the UK to resolve some of the problems. Then, if we've got time, because this should really take me to probably December to exhaust fully, we can have some discussion about what perhaps are some of the emerging problems that we might face in the future. I apologize for the purple and also for the sporadic appearance of these slides. It's just, I now have to transport everything onto the Durham thing, and the purple is some sort of ecclesiastic purple, which is we've had in our university for about 1,000 years, so I can't really change it, unfortunately. It's not my choice of purple either. Okay, so the rhetoric is we've got up to 3 million threats a year, so the SOPHOS reports tell us, the Symantec tell us it's 1.6 million. And then we contrast that with the reality in the UK that we've had 300 prosecutions under the Computer Misuse Act in 20 years, in 2 decades. Now, this tells me there's a little bit of an imbalance somewhere. And this imbalance sort of kicks off my intellectual inquiry, if you could call it that. My daughter usually laughs under her breath while I say that. But, kids do that to you. So cybercrime wave sweeping Britain. This is not unusual. This is from 2008. But you know, we had the same headlines this week for various reasons. And you have them. And I flick through the 165,000 channels on the hotel TV in the morning, and there's bound to be about 6 discussions at any one time about the problem of cybercrime, how Facebook is going to undermine the youth of the country and consign them all to doom. So that's really the basic of the inquiry. And then the rhetoric is, of course, the hackers can destroy society. The reality is quite different to expected. And this is one from one of your fabled publications, of course, the erudite Weekly World News, which I did contribute once 25 years ago. Every time we were traveling through America, we'd send a little postcard off, say we'd seen Elvis in a truck stop. And sometimes they used to publish them, which is quite good. But unfortunately, under our funding, educational funding, I couldn't report them as a publication. So, I mean, this is sort of taking a bit of a poke at this sort of whole rhetoric. But you know, the way people think about it is not too far from this. I follow with some interest the Wired magazine threat level discussions about Cyber Armageddon, and it's quite interesting. And what this does, this sort of sums up the debate, which I'll sort of try and deconstruct when I try to map things out later. Now the rhetoric, other rhetoric, is that all hackers are Russian. The reality is we don't really know. And the other question is it important? And this is interesting. This is what they look like. And this is what they want us to think they look like. And the truth is, if we start looking for 19-year-old Russian hackers, if we think that's the problem, well, we may be looking at we may be missing the big point. The big question is, does the devil drive a larder? This is what we want to know. I couldn't resist this. I'm sorry. This is shameless. And at least you know what a larder is. I tried to show this to my own students. They didn't know what a larder was. Yeah, those wonderful cars that leave this lovely pile of rust behind them as they float. Yeah, but the big question is, does the devil drive a larder, or does she? I mean, this could be more. I mean, we don't know. This is the point. We don't know. We're so busy looking for the 19-year-old Russian hacker, and I showed this the other day, and this chap said, is that a data cable? No, I think it's a walking stick, not a data table. But it's an interesting thought, isn't it, that actually our take on this may be wrong. I mean, the big question is, how important is it? What should we be looking for? I just thought I'd show you those slides. It's a bit like teacher going on holiday, isn't it, and coming back and showing the picture of them. I thought I'd show you those just to sort of lighten up the tone of the talk. So let's start off with the rhetoric. There's a range of cybercrime myths circling around, which are uncritically accepted. Now, I'm not saying they don't exist. There is an element of truth to them, The problem is that we just accept them without questioning them. And I think what I try to teach my own students is that you question everything and look for evidence to corroborate. And that's good practice. There's the first myth is that the internet is criminogenic. It creates crime in and of itself. Well, the evidence so far is that it doesn't. The volume of people using the internet is phenomenal. And the criminal side of it is just a very, very small part of a massive, immense picture. I know I'm mixing up metaphors here, but the internet is so large, it sort of asks you to mix metaphors. The other side of it is that the internet corrupts normally law-abiding citizens who go on a moral holiday when on the internet. Well, personally, I think people take their social values with them. Yes, there's a bit of experimentation out of the box. They may be looking on the top shelf. That's a euphemism for looking at pornography every now and then. In our newsagents in Britain, the pornography is on the top shelf. But by and large, people take their values with them. This is what I found, and this is how Facebook actually does work in the whole, and that's how a lot of policing takes place, and I'll come back to this. Cybercrime is overwhelming us. I don't think that's true, because more and more people are banking online. More and more people are using the internet for a wider range of things. Then this brings us to the hackers. The sort of myth that the hackers are omnipotent super users who are anonymous and go unpunished. I think there may be something in the fact that some of them do go unpunished, some of the fraudsters. But by and large, a lot of the evidence shows, particularly from the biographies of hackers, and we could start with Mitnick's biography. I mean, apart from his expert knowledge about how communication systems were set up, his greatest skill was really in talking access codes out of people. So really, we can't just sort of embrace this concept of the hackers being totally impervious. I always worry about saying that because impervious, able to penetrate any system. I always worry when I say that because I have a horrible feeling that I'm going to come home one night and just find my computer system wiped out with a big ha-ha on the thing. But it's basically, we should be questioning these myths, these wisdoms. And the other one is that organized crime is taking over. And I just don't accept that. We need to have more information about how the crime is organized. As soon as you say organized crime, you start thinking of the Mario Puzo model, the Godfather, the command and control. Well, my understanding is that the internet evades mafia control in the same way as it evades state control. We have new forms of organized crime on the internet, and it's comparatively different. It's a lot flatter. So we have to be critical about the myths. Okay, so what fuels the rhetoric? And the simple answer that is, you can just say the media, but they play a central part. We have generally an over-problematizing of some of the internet problems, and at the same time we have an under-reporting of some of the media problems, particularly of some of the internet problems, particularly where they're affecting people. This is not helped by a lack of reliable statistics. On the one hand, could you ever have reliable statistics about the internet? Because it's networked. It's not like the murder rate where all the information goes through policing sources or government sources. The internet is distributed, so it's going to vary at different levels. And we've had a disintermediation of the data in the sense that, as I said before, the central statistics do not go through the government. The central statistics it's not agreed what we're keeping statistics on. What we have, though, are a range of threat reports from the various cybersecurity companies. They're very flawed, but they do actually give you a ballpark figure, but they have to be used in a different way. On the whole, though, there's been a lack of reliable statistics. There's also been a lack of reliable news, a disintermediation of the news process. When I first started doing media studies at one of my early programs, we used to criticize the press because the whole of the news process was controlled by, I don't know, a cadre of about 20 editors. And of course now we've lost that control, and we want them back. We used to be critical. What we've lost is the disintermediation. We've lost the news integrity through disintermediation. What Nick Davis calls churnalism. He did a survey of the way that news is reported and found that 70% of news reports were based on either PA, Press Association, or on press releases from press officers. And they were sort of unquestionably reproduced or misinterpreted. And a classic form of misinterpretation was taking the press release from Symantec or Sophos or one of the cybersecurity companies, which simply reported the cybercrime threats which their software had picked up. And the journalists would turn that into cybercrime wave. It would give the impression that 3 million people have been victimized. Of course, you can twist that by saying, well, these are still cybercrimes, but just because there are 3 million circulating or 1.6 million, depending on the view, it doesn't mean to say that these people have been victimized. So we've got this over-problematization, but we've also got this under-reporting by individuals, so we don't know what the real problem is. At an individual level, there's a displacement, and the classic form of victimization really is being defrauded. And what is characteristic about the internet is that cybercrimes tend to be fairly small, but there's lots of them, millions of them, and they're significant in their aggregate. So when the individual reports to the police in England, they're referred to the credit card companies, because the credit card company, not the individual, is seen as the victim because of the credit arrangements. Or the individual just dismisses it and thinks, well, it's only £10 or $15. It's not serious. They just can't be bothered to complain. And actually, when you've ever tried to complain, you go through, or report something, you go through 5, 6 levels, and by the time you got to the 5th level, you've more or less lost the will to live, particularly if they're playing that horrible, cheesy music. Sometimes people have become victimized because they've been somewhere they perhaps morally shouldn't. They've been in accessing a pornography site, or gay chat lines, that sort of thing. Or alternatively, they may not see the danger as being evident enough to report it. The corporate victims tell a different story. Very often, they don't want to report it because they see it as their private problem. They want to resolve this in their private interests. They don't want to show weaknesses. The loss is actually a part of their business model. They don't want to expose their soft underbelly to the public, and their shareholders will worry. The other problem is that there's problems of jurisdictionality. Values about cybercrimes shift from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. Definitions vary, and also degrees of cooperation. Something else that fuels the rhetoric, and I guess this fits in with the sort of media model, the informational flow, is the viral information flow, the way things can move very, very quickly. And I'm going to come back to that later, because that to me is one of the problems of the future, how we manage these viral information flows, particularly when it concerns misinformation. Now, the other side of this, and I'll try and talk through this pretty quickly, is when we think of hackers, the cyber criminals, actually our immediate port of call is to conjure up a mental picture of effectively something that's been culturally constructed. And I'm going to try and explain that very, very quickly. I guess this starts off in the Victorian novels that we've read as a kid. the time machine, the Victorian savant, the person who hacked time. You then add that to the post-war dystopic science fiction, 1984, about the perils of technology. Then we've got this sort of Alvin Toffler-esque period of faction. It's fiction and fact mixed together. I'm not saying that Toffler's book is actually fiction, but this whole future shock generation of literature. And then we have sort of viral panics resulting out of this. We've had sort of panics and moral panics over technology. And then the sort of general development of a culture of fear. And this is a concept that you find in a number of different forms appearing in sort of criminological debates. Frank Furedi calls it the culture of fear. And it's the expectation that there will be crime, there will be a problem. Before we know that there actually is, we're making prejudgments. And it also maps onto David Garland's crime complex. The next part of this is the competing visions of cyberspace, which add to this cultural model. We've got, on the one hand, we've got this two competing visions of cyberspace, and they're coming out of the cyberpunk novels, the cyberpunk literature. And this is very, very important in the final formation of the cybercriminal. It originated, obviously, of course, in William Gibson's novel, in his Burning Chrome articles in Omni magazine, and then furthermore in Neuromancer. And Gibson developed this concept, this meat space, which we're in now, cyberspace binary, that people are either in one or the other states. John Perry Barlow sort of took this sort of fictional state and actually tried to sort of articulate in a broader sense. I'm not sure I fully agree with Barlow's view, but it's an interesting development. I mean, he had a hybrid vision which combined Gibson with the real world in the imaginations of connected individuals. So we lived in the real world, but the cyberspace helped us make sense of some of the connections. Although imaginary, cyberspace is real because, you know, the things that happen in it have real consequences for those who are participating in it. I mean, I guess the term cybercrime itself is unclear where it originated. Probably in the 1980s and 90s late cyberpunk media. I mean, if anyone knows, can actually pin it down more, I'd be really interested to know. I recall it starting to be used around 1990, 1991. Cyberpunk defined cybercrime as a harmful activity taking place in virtual environments, which we sort of more or less accept today. But it made the high-tech, low-life hacker narrative an entertainment norm in the hacksploitation movies. And I'm just going to talk about those briefly in a minute. And Gibson's model of cyberspace has actually become the conceptual norm. It shaped the public imagination through the visual media, and it's begun to influence social theory, which is the interesting thing. And how has it been expressed? We see it firstly through the science fiction forums, then through the science fiction novels, Neuromancer, and my favourite is Snow Crash. I think that's a brilliant novel. It maps out some very inventive scenarios. Of course, it's the metaverse in Snow Crash. Then the comic books, Dark Avenger and other stories. But also, we see it very well expressed in the hacksploitation movies, because this is, of course, what gives it the visual form. In the first generation, and this is before we had the internet, this is before we had the networking, we had a first generation of hacker films, which were sort of defined by the hack. This taxonomy isn't perfect, but it just sort of slots things into certain directions. If you remember the first Italian job, does anyone remember that? Anyone remember the first Italian job? Michael Caine? I only told you to blow the bloody doors off. No? Well, you've got to watch it. It's really interesting. It's about how they hacked to commit a massive bank robbery. They hacked the Turin traffic system. It was a mainframe computer with its little spurs. Similarly, Billion Dollar Brain took on a similar format. And Superman 3 as well. Do you remember Gus Gorman, Richard Pryor? No? Salami Fraud? Yeah. What's interesting about those films is they all took place on mainframes. The hackers were older men. I mean, Benny Hill played the hacker in Italian Job, and he was sort of an old professorial pervert. Superman 3, but Gus Gorman, a sort of bumbling, foolish type character. Similarly in Billion Dollar Brain. Then we got the second generation of films, which were defined by the gender-specific hacker. And this was the era of the modem, the dial-in modem. Networks across systems, hacking across systems. Matthew Broderick, I suppose, came to encapsulate that. Then we had Electric Dreams and Real Genius, and actually truckloads of other films that followed that same mold. It was there was a lot of high-tech low life, but also a lot of high-tech young kids who would right wrongs and have a growth experience in the process. For want of a better description. Some more than others. Then we had a later second generation where the hacks shifted into a cyberspace. And I need to go back and rethink some of this. The hackers were still young, but less gender specific. Less likely to adopt the moral high ground than earlier films. If you remember in GoldenEye, there's the hacker in there. Then in Hackers themselves, so then in The Net, the Sandra Bullock character. Then we came to a third generation films, which to me are defined by the broadband generation, although Tron actually curiously fits within that, where the hacker and the hack exist in virtual environments. And The Matrix is another one of that. That's pure Gibson. And also pure Baudrillard in some sense. Has anyone seen The Matrix? Do you remember the little bit with the white rabbit? Do you know, he goes to the door, he takes the money, and he goes, the couple come to the door, and he takes a book out of the cupboard, opens it up, and it's hollowed out. Do you know what the book is? It's Jean Baudrillard's Simulacra and Simulation. Apparently it influenced the Wachowski brothers. I've been trying to fit Die Hard 4 into all this, because I think this is very, very responsive. This is very, very key to all this debate. And it's an interesting one, because a lot of the hackers in these films have sort of humiliated the state. And in Die Hard 4, the sort of state starts to strike back. And I'm still trying to work on that. I don't think it's quite a fourth generation yet. I'm still trying to, so please excuse me for that. And if you've got any ideas, I'd love to hear them. But then we had the movies, but then we have the TV movies and the TV programs, which just reproduce the themes and narratives from the Hollywood movies. Then the video games. The point is that the contemporary movies and media imagery subconsciously orders the line between fact and fiction. And it crystallizes the hacker-offender stereotype as the archetypal cybercriminal. You then map that onto the policing, the sort of traditional policing crime model. And we get a completely distorted perception of cybercrime. We start looking for things that are dramatic. The traditional policing model is based on policing the dangerous others, the dangerous criminals, keeping them off the streets. And so we go in and we're looking for someone who's dangerous. This is how we get the construction of the Russian hacker, because it maps onto political stereotypes or current political debates. I could probably articulate that in a more erudite way if I wasn't jet lagged and hadn't been talking all day. But the result of the rhetoric is a low level of public knowledge about the risk, low offender profiles, few common definitions of cybercrimes. You know, the myths help perpetuate this. Raised public expectations, and this is really important, it's the raising of public expectations for the government to act and raised expectations of the police to act. So we get this emergence of a reassurance gap between what the public demand, shaped by the culture of fear in my view, and what the police and the government can provide. And this is certainly what we've experienced in the UK recently. This is just a little example of the way this plays out. In 2007, the House of Lords Science and Technology Committee published a report on personal internet security. There's a methodological flaw in this, in that they didn't actually really discuss personal internet security. It was mostly corporate security. But the report itself is quite informative, quite useful, but the abstract, which is the part of the executive summary, which was part of the press release, sort of is the representative of that report to the media, who reproduce 70% of those reports as they're presented. So it says the internet is now increasingly the playground of criminals, where a decade ago the public perception of the e-criminal was a lonely hacker searching for attention. Today's bad guys belong to organized crime groups, are highly skillful, specialized and focused on profit. Actually, there's a bit of truth in some of that. They want to stay invisible, and so far they have largely succeeded. But then it goes on to say, whilst the incident and cost of e-crime are known to be huge, no accurate data exists. It sort of contradicts itself in many ways. And the report does that through and through. It sort of falls into some of the traps. So how do we map out the contours of cybercrime and the scope of criminal opportunity? Values in cyberspace are in ideas, not physical property. True cybercrimes are asymmetric and not symmetric. Cybercrimes are transnational, they have no boundaries. Well, that's not particularly true. I mean, increasingly, we're finding that the internet has a linguistic geography, and also that you can identify the location of some of the fixed computers through the IP addresses which have been allocated to. And I'm sure the computer scientists will tell me lots of other ways that they can be identified. There's also the fact that they're reasonably instantaneous and free of physical time frame. This all falls down when I try to send an email to someone in the office next to me. It has to go around Durham, around the medieval streets of Durham, then down to Cambridge, round the Cambridge ring and the academic circuit, then back up, and it appears about 5 minutes later, 3 to 5 minutes later. If I was to email Tom or one of you here, it would take place almost instantaneously. So it's bizarre. But by and large, it is fairly instantaneous and fairly free of a physical time frame. I suppose a chosen time frame. Chosen time is the frame it exists in. Cybercrimes are also fairly contentious in that there does not exist yet a core of values about them, and I think that's still fairly true. They also require, this is becoming less the case, considerable technical knowledge to be enacted. I mean, I guess the technical knowledge now is not about programming on computers, but more about the systems that people are trying to get into, whether it be a financial system or a computing system or a communication system. The discussion of cybercrimes tends to be offense-based. So, how do we map out this? There's 3 different levels, 3 different ways, and this emerges and is reaffirmed by conversations one has in cybercrime horizon planning meetings and various other meetings with government agencies. The thing that strikes me immediately in these conversations is that there are 3 levels of criminal activity. There's that which relates to personal security, there's that which relates to corporate security, then there's that which relates to national security. And I don't know if you've ever been in any of these meetings, but you'll find various stakeholders who have an interest in each of these. They'll try and talk across each other, and it doesn't really help take the debate forward. They're very, very different debates with very, very different stakeholders, and they require different responses. The next level is the level of mediation. I'm sorry about the colours, incidentally. The level of mediation by technology. So on the one hand, we've got, under the cybercrime rubric, we've got the traditional crimes that use computers. These can range from the cybercrimes that use the mainframe computers I mentioned earlier, through to, like, nowadays, murderers using the internet to see how to dismember bodies. And very often now it's police practice in Britain to seize the computers of murderers or victims to see if there's any relationship in terms of communications from there. But they're by and large traditional crimes that exist in a body of law that use computers. If you took away the internet, which is the big test, what would you be left with? The murders would probably still take place. Then, at the other end of the spectrum, we have the true cybercrimes, which are in and of the internet, purely of the internet. Take away the internet and they just disappear. And there are new forms of harmful activity. And these are spams, which are illegal in the UK as they are in the US. Internet piracy, I mean, we can debate about its criminality and legal provenance, but by and large, the debates over piracy have been discussed within a criminal framework, criminological framework, criminal framework. Then there's phishing, and then more recently, scareware, which to me was the first true cybercrime that we've ever really had. Which, do you know what I mean by scareware? It's where you get a pop-up, and it looks like the Microsoft operating system, usually, and it says that your computer's been infected with a Trojan, and it usually names one, the Trojan of the day, a Zeus or whatever. And it will then say, please download this patch to get rid of it. You download it, and some jiggery-pokery looks as though it's happening, although it may not be doing anything. Then it will say, you're safe now, you're okay now for this session. This is just one of the scenarios that plays out. But it would be a good idea if you downloaded the professional version, and there's a small administrative charge for this, which is about $15, £10 or so. And you'll be protected forever. And you do that, you give your... then that's the last you hear about it. It's gone away. But you've been scammed. And what is unique about it, in my view, is that it's the first time we've really seen a piece of software successfully deceive someone and defraud them and send the money back to the crooks. Now, phishing almost did that. It took your information away from you, but it still required the crooks to get a money mule to go to the bank to get the money out. And in that sense, although it was asymmetric in terms of getting the information, it's symmetric in terms of the one-to-one between the crooks and the bank. This is an asymmetric crime. And to me, although it seems very benign, it's significant. And on one of the things we followed, one of the examples, there was something like 30,000 hits, it looked like. So that's £1 million return, $1 million return on that. So that's a significant crime. And someone's benefited to that sum. Then more recently we've had Stuxnet, which is very controversial because there's a lot of conspiracies flying around about Stuxnet. But what makes it so significant, and we can discuss that later, but what makes it so significant from this true cybercrime point of view, it's so expertly crafted, it clearly was devised to, a worm which was devised to attack a certain form of operating system in a certain configuration. And I guess what makes people really concerned about it is that these operating systems are the SCADA systems that operate utilities. So for the first time, we've got a real serious contender as a true cybercrime. Now, in the middle, we have this rather confusing level of what I call the hybrid cybercrimes. Stan McQuaid calls them adaptive cybercrimes. I think it could be either. These are the crimes that exist in law, they're covered by a body of law, for which the internet has given a global opportunity. And I'm thinking here primarily about frauds, although you could include pornography, obscene materials, in this. You include other forms of software. But primarily frauds. So you find forms of fraud appearing in parts of the world which have never experienced that sort of fraud. So you get the globalization of criminal ideas. Then, of course, there's a global effect because the local police then have to respond to that. If people report it, and in some of the poorer countries, of course, $15 is quite a lot of money. Anyhow, so those are the three areas, three types of cybercrimes which we can map out. The true cybercrimes are networked, distributed, and automated. They're informational, they're global, and networked. And it's interesting to watch their evolution as well, because they don't last for very long. Their impact is in their novel quality. We've never experienced this before. This is why the scareware was so effective. This is why the first iterations of phishing was so effective. And it's quite fascinating to watch the evolution of phishing into farming, which is the cache poisoning, but then also into smishing, which is using SMS text messaging to do the same thing, then to vishing, which is using the voice over internet protocol. It's amazing to see how it evolves craftily. Scareware itself has evolved from being something scary. In the early days, what would happen is you were not just scared, you were also humiliated into paying this money. The whole screen would suddenly freeze, and then it would, I don't know if anyone ever experienced it, the whole thing would shatter and fall to the bottom, and then a big skull would appear and laugh at you and say, ha, ha, ha. You know, it was extortion, effectively. And that has evolved into something which is a lot more stealthy. It's really clever stuff, but quite frightening. Now, this, we've got the public internet security debates, we've got the corporate internet security debates, we've got the national security debates we've differentiated between. We've now differentiated between the traditional crimes using computers and the true cybercrimes with the hybrids in the middle. But we haven't then addressed the different types of crime. There are sort of three fundamental families, in my view, which fit into three different bodies of law. We have the crimes against the machine, the integrity-related cybercrimes. This is the integrity of systems. These are the crimes that break into systems, the hacking, the denial of service, distributed denial of service attacks. They're addressed by bodies of law in the US as they are in the UK. We have the Computer Misuse Act in the UK, which sort of deals with these. It deals with unauthorized access, it deals with unauthorized access to modify data, and it deals with unauthorized access to commit other crimes. Oh, these are frauds, not frauds, incidentally. That's not a new cyber term. I'm afraid I spelled that wrong. Then the next one is the crimes using the machine, the computer-assisted crime. This is where people have got onto the computer network has accepted their username and password. Whether they've got that illegally or not is a different issue. They're using the computer to commit a crime, and it's deceptions and frauds, which is frauds actually. Yeah. The third area is crimes in the machine. And this is where it's related to the content of the machine, what's on the hard drive. And extreme pornography is the key area. But also, violent or abusive speech will be on the hard drive. And also evidence of grooming. So these are the crimes in the machines. Now, yes, it gets complicated because scareware could actually involve all three, because it hacks into the machine to operate. It uses the machine to defraud you. And also, in the machine, there is imagery which looks familiar, like the Microsoft operating system, which gets your trust. I know the Apple users will be laughing there, but yes, if you're a Windows operator, yes, it's those images which sort of you trust. And interestingly, as far as I can see, the only way that Microsoft has been able to deal with some of the scareware is through intellectual property law. But the primary focus of scareware is to use the machine to defraud people. And I think that three-pronged attack does work. So, what are the criminal justice challenges? And we've got till about past, is that right? Then it's right, good. I'm just putting the flaps down now. We'll be coming to land soon. You'll hear a loud grumbling noise when I put the underground carriage down. I was just thinking of that flight into to Lebanon Airport yesterday. That was interesting, yeah. Yeah, what are the criminal justice challenges? Most cybercrimes avoid the criminal justice radar. And the reasons for this is many of them are too small in impact, singularly, to inspire police response. And therein lies the problem. You've got, I think it's 16,569 independent police forces, or nigh on 17,000. That's quite a lot. So if you've got a couple of reports of these little things to each police force, well, they're going to think, well, so what? You know, not us. But, you know, again, important criminal intelligence is being lost across the whole range. I know you have some reporting systems, which I'm going to come to next. Then we have this problem of that in some jurisdictions there's no law, so it isn't a crime. Spamming is not a crime in Brazil. Hacking wasn't a crime in Brazil until recently. Then there's jurisdictional disparities and decisions about where to prosecute. So, I mean, in the US, I gather it's better to prosecute pornography cases in the South rather than the North. The other criminal justice challenge is the fact that if it doesn't fall within the routine police activity, it tends not to be funded. It's hard for the police to deal with. It's not picked up. The police develop little experience in this area, although the UK police do what the US police do, is just create a specialist unit. The trouble is it becomes so successful that the person who's in charge of it then gets promoted to another area. I mean, that's what happens in the UK. Then there's the general underreporting that I mentioned earlier. That's another criminal justice challenge, that we don't actually understand what the true picture of the crime is. And then our old friend, the conflict between private and public justice interests. So we need systems that capture all the criminal intelligence, but that also allow a resolution to the problem, to find out what the aggregate issue is. So, one of the interesting things about the internet is that the police play actually a very small part of it. When you start to break down how the internet's governed, this arises from a question I put, I guess, to myself. Why aren't there more cybercrimes? If the internet's so criminogenic, if it's so problematic, why aren't there more cybercrimes, given how important the internet is to us? And the answer is because there are about 7, and there are probably more, some of these could break down into subgroups, 7 key areas of cybercrime governance. And this is where I come back to this idea about people bringing their social values onto the internet. I think they're very important. We have the internet users and user group, and over again we see people in social networking sites admonishing others because they disagree with what they say. We see user groups taking up the cause, protecting others, quite vocally in some cases. The next level, and they do that by moral censure, in effect. That's the auspices of their governance. At the next level, we've got the virtual environment managers and the security people. I would also include here the reputational management systems of eBay and companies like that. They basically manage interactions when they just step outside the norm. The next step up is the network infrastructure providers who effectively, when we all sign the terms and conditions, and if we breach those terms and conditions, they can technically withdraw our service. And they themselves have a contractual relationship with the telecoms providers. So there's a whole level of contractual governance in here. So we've moved from moral censure to contractual. Then there's the corporate organizations and corporate security, who are a very, very important part of this whole figure. And but you know, as I said, they on the one hand, we have a contractual relationship with them, but they operate in the private interests. Then the next level is the non-governmental, now I've got to get this right, non-governmental, non-police. And the model I have in my own mind here, and there will be US models, is the Internet Watch Foundation, which takes reports of obscene imagery in the UK. It's not owned by the government, it's actually owned by the internet service providers or funded by them. And its origins are that it was funded by the internet service providers to stop the government interfering and allow them self-regulation. It's a very effective organization. In truth, a lot of the staff are ex-police, and in truth, you'll find there's some Home Office funding helping aspects of training behind it. But it's a very, it's effective non-governmental, non-police organization, and there are other examples. Then we have the governmental non-police organizations. I'm thinking here of departments like the FTC in the US, and in Britain we have the department, BIS, which is Business, Department of Business. Then finally, we come to the public police organizations, who actually play a very, very small part in the policing of the internet, but who are expected to play a much larger role, and it's a real tension for them how to deal with that. So how do they do it? I'm going to whiz through this. We've had a lot of discussions in recent years. We've had the development of a cybersecurity strategy, which as we talk is being revised, because this was a Labour cybersecurity strategy, and we now have to have a conservative cybersecurity strategy. I don't think it will say too much different, but there will be one or two changes. So we have a national security strategy, then we have a cybersecurity strategy, and an e-crime strategy. And the drivers were data losses, the threat of terrorism, and the threat of cybercrime. And that's what it effectively looks like. And it looks very linear, but it's one of these classic arguments about turf wars, about ownership. The Cabinet Office advises the government, and they own the national security strategy. The National Cybersecurity Strategy is again owned by the Cabinet Office, and it has developed the Office of Cybersecurity, which is informed by, I think it's called CSOC. It's I can't remember what it stands for, but it's effectively, it's our GCHQ at Cheltenham. So it starts off with a visible face, then there's the back face, which is a bit spooky and foggy, I think is the best way to describe it. And that gives the Cabinet Office or the Office of Cybersecurity sort of hard information about what's going on. We then have the National Cybercrime Strategy, because the Home Office is responsible for cybercrime. But we also have a National Fraud Strategy, and this is the Office of the Attorney General. So there's a lot of there's been a lot of squabbling. There's been a lot of turf wars here. But it does start to make some lines of communication clear. Then at the bottom line here is ACPO is our Association of Chief Police Officers. They have a very, very strong voice. And they developed their own policing strategy, which then caused the modification of some of these other strategies. And this is how they deal with it. So that is strategy-wise, that's how we deal with cybercrimes in the UK. I'm just going to go through this quickly again. As I mentioned before, we had the development of the Office of Cybersecurity to provide leadership and coherence across government. And I don't think it's going to disappear. I think that we will have a new strategy, but the office will still have the same function. Then the Cybersecurity Operations Centre is the one that runs out of GCHQ. to actively monitor the health of cyberspace. And to give a better understanding of attacks against UK networks and users. But I think it's about attacks against systems, against infrastructure, and that's where the focus is. Okay, now something central that came out of the, key that came out of the ACPO, the Association of Chief Police Officers Policing Strategy, e-crime policing strategy, was the development of a police central e-crime unit. The funding is very small. It's about £3.5 million over 3 years. So that doesn't buy you many bodies. It sits next to the Metropolitan Police Unit to provide specialist e-crime support. It's actually remarkably effective for the small amount of money it costs and how many different crime groups it's brought down. It receives tactical information from the National Fraud Intelligence Bureau, which is the point of contact for intelligence and information. And it disseminates e-crime intelligence to ACPO police forces throughout the through the country. This will change very soon, I think, with the formation of the National Crime Agency. We're going to develop, I think, I'm almost certain, a sort of FBI-type organization formally. And that will include our Serious and Organized Crime Agency, our Child Exploitation Online Protection Agency, which is technically part of SOCA at the moment. And I think the Police Central E-Crime Unit will go into it as well. Now, this is what it starts to look like, okay? So, at the moment, reports of cybercrime come in. And if they are frauds, they come into a new organization. It's a call center called Action Fraud. You've got a similar one in the US. Is it the IC, Internet Computer Crime, Cybercrime Complaint Center or something like that? And Action Fraud, it's an outsourced operation. It passes the intelligence onto the information onto the National Fraud Intelligence Bureau. There's an interesting historical power play here between the Metropolitan Police and the City of London. The City of London, the Metropolitan Police got the Police Central E-Crime Unit. The City of London Police got the National Fraud Intelligence Bureau. This is a squabble that's gone on for 180 years. It's it's only in Britain. Yeah. I went to, as an aside, I was at Cambridge, at St John's College in Cambridge, and they're still arguing about the old and new library. We're talking about a library that was, one library, the old library, that was formed in 1357, and the new library that was built in 1441. Gosh, we don't let things go, I'm afraid, in the UK. Anyhow, the National Fraud Intelligence Bureau triages all of the reports. Many of them are probably just dismissed. But the information about them is collected, and that develops into the strategic intelligence. New types of frauds, for instance, new types of maybe shifting from the banking sector, for instance, to the insurance sector or something like that. But it also passes on the tactical crime intelligence to the policing agencies, mostly to the Police Central E-Crime Unit. If it involves child abuse, it will go to CEOPS, or if it's outside, if there is a local link, they will pass it on to the local police forces. Alternatively, if it's serious fraud, it will go to the Serious Fraud Office or the Serious Organised Crime Agency, if it's got some organised crime involvement, or the security services if there's a sort of foggy element to it. Alternatively, it could go to Interpol or the virtual task force. There's a virtual task force which deals with frauds, but there's a virtual global task force which tends to deal with pornography and exploitation. Yeah, that gets very confusing. And it's toes being trod on and turf wars. The smell of turf emanates out of all this. So that's what happens with our frauds. And if that works successfully, the thinking is that the action fraud model will be rolled out for the other types of cybercrime, the crimes, the hackings, and the extreme pornography. At the moment, we have the Internet Watch Foundation, which I meant before, who will receive reports from the public about extreme pornographic image or websites that they've seen. They will then identify the problem. They're trained to do that and quite effective at it. And they will pass on the information to the police, or they will report to internet service, a similar organization in another country if it's from that country. It's a very small operation, but quite effective for what it does. But it misses a lot. Similarly, crimes against the machine, the hackings, we have a UK cert like you have a US cert. But you or I could not ring up UK cert with a problem. What I would do is I'd report that to my the security person in my internet service provider, who would then report it to the UK cert. It's a system, but not a very good system at the moment. And again, examples of criminal intelligence are being lost in both these outliers. The UK cert then reports it to, after they've done a triage, to whoever. So hopefully, if things pan out, we have a system which will be modeled on this, where we have full reports from the public that are then triaged, and the tactical intelligence goes to the agencies that can deal with it, and the strategic intelligence is collated so that future strategies in the areas can be dealt with. Okay. I am actually going over a bit, I'm sorry. Quickly, what will we face in the future? The new forms of crime. Well, there's been a lot of proof of concept arguments in the past. You know, so-and-so crimes could happen. So-and-so vulnerabilities could take place. I'm speaking very broadly there. Some of these will probably start to be realized. We've got new hacks, new frauds, social networking as a means of offenders engaging with victims. I think we're also going to see the convergence of cybercrimes, where the software is going to it's going to get into machines and then use that machine to defraud people. Convergence of technologies. On the one hand, I mean, I don't know about you, but I use the Windows system, as I mentioned, but I've just bought an iPad, which I dearly love. It's a thing of beauty. And, it has an amazing effect on people. It's like puppies and attractive women. Sorry if I may be so sexist. I tried to get my daughter to come and see her grandparents the other week, and she refused steadfastly until I waved the iPad. And similarly, it keeps my 11-year-old quiet. I bought a 59p application, a little game, and it just keeps his gob shut. It's great. I mean, it's the best 59p I've ever spelt. True thing of beauty. But in joining the iPad to the Windows system, it creates lots of vulnerabilities. There are different sensibilities, different consciousnesses about security from the different systems. And there's big questions about what one system could be leading into another. And then the killer toaster thing, which you've probably read there, is I went to a conference on ambient technologies in Europe, and this guy was going on about, this chap was going on about, I think it's from Germany, how they were developing this ambient house, how it would sense you as you walked in, and how you'd walk out in the morning and it would realize that the fridge hasn't got any milk, so it would order some milk, which would be delivered. But it would also, you could turn the toaster on, and you could fill it with white bread or brown bread. And I did a little scenario where you could actually put some Pop-Tarts in it and set it for 15 minutes, and it would turn into an incendiary device and burn the house down. So that's where the killer toaster, you could hack the ambient system. But Stuxnet and scareware, to me, are significant developments. Possibly not so much in and of themselves, but what they represent, and that's a paradigm shift in cybercrimes. And this is why I really want to be able to talk to computer scientists as a criminologist. We're privileged in that we can tie some golden threads together to develop a narrative. But, I find it very, very hard to take that narrative, investigate that narrative further. Finally, I've got some notes on Stuxnet. let's go into... It's significant because it came in through USB sticks. It establishes a rootkit as well as backdoor connections, which allows external control. But unlike other worms, it aggressively attacks specific types of SCADA systems by particular manufacturers, and that is significant. The 2010 July Stuxnet worm had a kill date and a limited scope. It sought particular systems, indicating that it was intended to hit specific targets, but it didn't actually find them this time. The trouble is, the conspiracy theories have started to roll about this. There's a rhetoric about it. It's now not just about a virus. It's about a potential cyber war between Israel and Iran, depending on what version. And my understanding is that this is not conclusive, but the actual rhetoric has started to develop a life of its own. Make a really good dissertation project, actually, for a student. Viral information pros are going to be a problem. This is one that scares me more than anything, actually. This is where you manipulate information on the internet to create social action. We've had a couple of examples of that recently. One was just the other week where a young lady had a party and invited her friends. 21,000 people said they would come to her party. You know, if you could manipulate that, I mean, you know, that could be pretty disastrous, couldn't it? Demolish the house. And then the other one is that our Northern Rock Bank was nearly brought down because people panicked about it, and I'll mention that in a second. And of course, Y2K had a bit of that about it. So if anyone could manipulate the misinformation, that could be a very powerful force. And I always think that if a cyber terrorist attack is likely to come thumping from left field rather than the most obvious area. And technical solutions. I think we've got to start thinking about. It's more questions than anything else. Should Microsoft allow updates to their copied systems? That would help make the system, the internet, more secure, because they're the precise computers that are part of the botnets. Should we allow updates from every World Wide Web source, like we allow 911 calls from mobile phones without service? Yeah, I think I'm going to finish there. I was going to talk about, this is an interesting thing. Panic on the streets of London, the subprime panic. This is just before the credit crunch. We had rows and rows of people silvery-haired old age pensioners trying to get their savings and money out of the banks. And there's riot police there policing them. I don't know what they're expecting them to do. It's a crazy thing. Let's call it a day there. I know I'm 10 minutes over. But I'm sure you've got lots of questions. Some of these things I've been skating over thin ice. Okay, I agree with that. But that was just to make the narrative more. David.
One question I was thinking about, presenting that nice flow chart of all the different ways that you react to incoming information. In the UK, what's the thinking about the public-private partnerships? In the US, I know we're struggling because most of the information infrastructure, as well as other infrastructure, is owned by private parties, and yet the government ultimately feels the need to do something if we have a major cyber attack or cybercrime incident.
And that hits the nail on the head. I mean, it's the only way we can deal with the problem is if we can get systems together where we get the public and private partnerships working. We tried that in Leeds, in West Yorkshire, where I used to work, and we developed a digital dialogue, we called it, and it was effectively dinner where we invited the heads of all the local banks, and there's lots of local banks up in the north. It's the second largest financial centre in the country. And we also brought the head of the fraud squad along. And at the end of the day, it worked really well. It developed personal links, and they started to develop a partnership.
Is that what it's about then in the end, you think, is that for those kinds of joint responses?
It's a bit more than that. You see, the problem was that it was so successful that the head of the fraud squad got promoted, and it collapsed. I think you have to constitutionalize these things. Yeah, and how do you do that? Because it's the personal links that make it work. So these things aren't going to happen naturally, I think. I think that's the answer to this.
A somewhat related question I have is, what's the distinction between cybercrime and cyberterrorism?
Oh, yeah. Well, cyberterrorism is where you're using the internet to generate fear in order to manipulate the political agenda. That's different for crime, which is for sort of financial and.
And given an emerging incident,
no, that's a really, really good point.
crime is not all financial, is it? I mean,
No, it's
child
revenge.
pornography or child abduction or forms of cybercrime.
Yeah. But I mean, a lot of those are actually they're quite rare. They're sort of black swans. I mean, the problem is that knowing when, as you say, when something is happening, whether it's it's a crime or whether it's actually a terrorist act, whether it's designed to scare people or it's designed to shape that political agenda. I don't know. The problem is you need new methodologies because you've got the data happening. We've just got to be able to respond to it as it happens.
Not all of which you can see. Not all of which you can see, most likely.
Yeah. You don't know it's happened until it's happening until it's happened.
How well does it, when you put up that hierarchical chart of these different organizations, how well does the data actually flow through there? So by the time something gets to the bottom level, is it timely? Is there enough rich data so they can do something useful?
It's a really good question.
There's a lot of bureaucracy.
And the answer is I don't know yet because the action fraud only started to fully function in March this year. And they haven't published their report yet. That's a really good question. I think what I'm encouraged by is the fact that we've actually started to discuss this in our country, and we've actually started to develop the systems, the sort of the tactical and strategic. We need to. I'm not sure also about how many people are actually working in the National Fraud Intelligence Bureau, and whether they've got enough capacity to deal with all this. I mean, that's another question.
Kind of follow on to that too. How would you see it working once it takes on an international flavor too? I mean, obviously, UK is probably going to have some of the same issues that the US is in terms of prosecuting cybercrimes. What do you see, or how would you see an international system coming together to?
Yeah. And who owns it, and who pays for it, and who trains the people? I don't know. To me, the internet is a protocol which everyone's buying into. In my heart of hearts, I would like to see some sort of system which everybody buys into and sort of follows. You've got your IC3, Internet Computer Crime Center, is it? Complaint Center, which people can respond to. I mean, that sort of, there's a rough similarity, correlation, that's it, with the with our system, our action fraud.
I know that the certs are trying increasingly to work closely with each other.
It's not easy, and I'll tell you what I find really frustrating is that we haven't actually advanced that much in the past 10 years. And we're still having the same discussions. I'm glad you said that, because I'm really frustrated by the lack of, the uncritical acceptance of some of these myths. It's just the assumption that there's a certain configuration. It's quite frightening. Yeah.
It seems like a lot of the strategy for policing crime or policing the effect of crime are based on myths about these crimes. So before we start creating inter-organizational efforts to reduce the crimes of police, then don't we have to sort of figure out how they,
We do, but it's not that easy. It's not that easy, absolutely. And I think what I'm saying is, I'm not saying that some of these myths don't have some grounding. It's just we're uncritically accepting them, and and you're looking for dangerous people when in fact perhaps we shouldn't be looking for dangerous people. We should be just looking at the crimes themselves. Some crimes can be dealt with technically, others not. But the problem is, at the end of the day, there's someone committing them. And it's putting the lens back onto them, looking down the telescope the other way.
Well, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.